So, Beth, go ahead, take it away. Thank you so much for being here. And then listen to Beth.
Glad to be here.
Cool.
Good morning. All right, as John mentioned, I'm co-founder of Neurosomatic Specialists. We're right across the street on the other side of 19 in the Cogent Bank building. And what we do is we help people that have pain or other dysfunction in their body by looking for patterns. So where have you got imbalances in your body? And so we'll look at you in standing, we'll look at you in movement, and try to figure out where are things not lining up, not moving properly. And then we treat that with muscular therapy, which is like it's trigger point therapy and other types of hands-on therapy, as well as some corrective exercises to help you get moving more correctly to avoid having things coming back, helping you resolve the initial cause. So today's topic is neck and shoulders, so I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about things that could be going on in your neck and shoulders that can cause pain in those areas as well as other areas. So the coaches here at Evolve are really good at coaching you on how to treat yourself with foam rollers and lacrosse balls, softballs, and we've kind of learned that doing that helps us feel better. But what are we actually doing? Does anyone kind of know what the physiology is and what what's happening? All right, Tommy. You can't remember. Well, it actually does a lot of things. It promotes blood flow. It warms up the tissues to get ready for exercise. It helps clear out lactic acid from yesterday's workout. And one of the things it does is actually releases trigger points. So what's a trigger point? I wrote the definition up here. It's a tight band that restricts range of motion and causes pain or other sensation. So there's a more lengthy official definition, but that's it in a nutshell. So what about this other sensation? So it's not just pain. So trigger points can cause numbness, tingling, ringing in the ears, headaches, stomach issues, like organ issues, because we treat all the tissues at Neurosomatic Specialists, not just muscles, but there could be things going on throughout the body, tissues everywhere. And so it could be the fascia, that's the tissue that holds the muscles together. It could be the skin. It could even be ligaments where trigger points reside. So does anybody know has anybody heard, everybody's kind of heard of trigger points, right? It's like something that's pretty commonly known. But what causes a trigger point? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Yeah. There's actually probably a lot of causes. But even it's a trick question, really, because the experts haven't even agreed on what causes it. But what they've noticed, and everybody kind of agrees, that there's a tendency for trigger points to form when you're in an overload situation. And John talked about this in the last session. So what's overload? It's when the load exceeds capacity, and the definition goes on to say, particularly following excessive concentric or eccentric loading. So what's that mean? Concentric loading. That's when you're shortening the muscle. So say you've got a dumbbell in your hand and you're doing a bicep curl. That's concentric because you're shortening the muscle. And then eccentric is when you're using that muscle to hold the muscle. That's eccentric. So, of course, does anybody do that in here? Are we doing any concentric or eccentric loading? A little, John says. But it's not just when you're working out. It's everyday life. So when you're sitting at your computer for 12 hours and you're holding yourself like this, you've got muscles eccentrically holding you in that pattern. And you can exceed your capacity for load just by sitting at your desk too long. And all those things that John talked about last time, you can adjust your capacity by doing the right things like getting good sleep, drinking your water, getting good nutrition. All those things can help raise your capacity so that you don't exceed that capacity with the load. But when you do have a situation where you've gone over, then trigger points are one of the things that are likely going to happen. And trauma, that's another one that can cause trigger points. So your body doesn't know the difference between a car accident or a surgery. Anything that's traumatic to your tissues, the muscles go into spasm as a protective mechanism. And when they're in that spasm state, they form trigger points. And then if you stay in that state for a long time, so say you've got your upper traps in spasm, and then it's not functioning right because you've restricted your range of motion. So some other muscles are going to have to, like your levator, your scalenes, these other muscles are going to have to like kick in and start doing part of the work, and then they're going to go into overload and get trigger points. So it's kind of a snowball effect. If you've had something for a long time, it's likely going to be involving several muscles, not just one. And then to make things even more complicated, when we're talking about trigger points, we often speak of referrals. So you might have a trigger point in one muscle that causes a pain or sensation somewhere else completely unrelated to where that muscle is. So that's where these charts come in, that hopefully everybody got a handout. So the smart people have figured out there's patterns to these trigger point referrals, and that's what this chart is. It's supposed to be in color, but you can kind of see. So, for example, say look on the section 3 side, and where you see like little dots around the muscle, that's the referral zone. So, say you're looking at the rhomboid, that's in the 3rd row down on the left side. And you can see the dots are around the muscle. So if you know where your rhomboid is, that's between your scapula and your vertebrae. And if you have a pain in that area and you roll around on a softball, you have a pretty good chance of like working out that trigger point because you're in the right spot. But not all of these are that intuitive. So for example, look at the scalenes. So the scalenes are a neck muscle. They connect from your vertebrae down to your ribs. That's the second one on this first row. Look at all the different dots on that one. So it might refer to the same place as the rhomboids, right back here, or down the back of the arm, the front of the arm, the wrist, the thumb. So what if you had a wrist pain and you went to your doctor? They're going to say, oh, you probably have carpal tunnel syndrome. So let's send you to get an MRI, talk to the surgeon. And if they see something on the MRI, it may or may not be causing your pain because it could be coming from your scalenes, especially if you're sitting at a desk like this. That shortens the scalenes. And then you may end up getting a surgery. And then you may still have the pain, plus then you've got the trauma of the surgery to deal with. So it's an unfortunate fact that our medical system is not really trained to look for these trigger points. Doctors are more looking for things that they can treat with medicine or surgery. And this isn't really a new concept. This is something that goes way back. Janet Travell was one of the leading doctors that was investigating trigger points. She was President Kennedy's personal doctor. And she wrote the trigger point manual, literally. I've got it down here. There's multiple editions, but she researched this and figured out a lot of these patterns, and when it was helping by treating using injections with a needle into the muscles, saline solution, and she found that helped. But then we figured out there's other methods that are less invasive than so now we do manual therapy by pressing on the muscle to get it to release, or dry needling, if anybody's ever heard of that. That's targeting trigger points as well. So, unfortunately, because of this misdiagnosis problem that can happen with, trigger points that refer, there's been studies done on healthy people. Just take a healthy group of 20-year-olds, get an MRI, and see what does their spine look like. A study found that, like 75% of people in their 20s had bulging discs in their spine. And these were people that were not having back pain that they did this study on, just normal, healthy people. So you go to the doctor with back pain and they take an MRI and they see a bulging disc, they're going to say, oh, well, this is your problem. You've got this bulging disc. And then you may go get surgery because you've got that bulging disc, and then it may fix it. It could be the cause, but it might not. It might be a trigger point somewhere in a muscle that's referring pain into your back. And then you've got the trauma of the surgery on top of the original injury that's still not resolved. So it's important to understand trigger points. I've got a couple of examples of people I know in my practice. I mean, there's quite a few, but there's a couple that are really, really stand out. This one guy, he was he's the triathlon coach for MIT in Boston, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So he was pulling something out of his trunk and had a sharp pain in his shoulder. And he's in Boston. He's got access to the top doctors up there. He got 2 different opinions from different surgeons, and they looked at the MRI and said, Bill, you've got a thickness supraspinatus tear. That's the most commonly torn rotator cuff muscle. And you're going to have surgery. There's no 2 ways about it. You got to have a surgery. And he's like, I don't have time. I've got to go to Florida. My daughter's getting married. So he put it off, and he came to Florida. He was part of a swim that was going on down here, and his daughter was getting married. And a friend introduced him to me, and he came to me, and we started working the muscles around the shoulder. And he's like, wow. When he came to me, he couldn't even lift his arm. And then after a couple sessions, he's like, wow, I'm getting good range of motion. And we did some strengthening exercises. And within 3 swimming, and not only swimming, he did a swim race. He got 3rd place in the group. So, and the doctors told him he was going to have surgery. So what happened there? You know, I mean, these were top doctors, obviously not lax. I mean, there must have been some damage to the muscle, but it was able to repair itself. And those trigger points formed because of the trauma he had. And then that was what was really restricting his range of motion. I mean, you think about it, if a muscle's torn, it's not going to keep you from lifting your arm. You know, it's those spasms that in the muscle that are keeping you from moving your arm, that limited range of motion that I was talking about. So with referrals from muscles in the neck and shoulders, a lot of people get headaches. So let's look back at the trigger point chart. So look at the sternocleidomastoid. That's on section 2 side, upper right-hand corner. The sternocleidomastoid, we call it SCM for short, is that ropey muscle in the neck that goes from here down to the clavicle. And that muscle gets strained a lot in everyday life, just by looking at our phones, driving the car, looking at the computer. If you get an accident, you know, a car accident, whiplash, really will tighten up the SCM. But look at the referral patterns all around the eyes and the head, even in the ear. So people that have ringing in the ears chronically, that could just be a trigger point in the SCM. Let's look at the trapezius muscle. Where's that one on here? Oh yeah, that's to the left of the sternocleidomastoid. So look at the first picture there. You can see that one's got a big red dot right over the eye. You know, when people talk about tension, headaches, they're like, oh, my head is killing me right here. It's probably coming from the trapezius. It's one of the most common trigger points right here, the upper traps. And then what about jaw pain? That could be the masseter. If you put your hand right here and clench your jaw, and feel that bulge, feel the muscle bulge out when you clench your jaw, that's your masseter. That's the strongest muscle in the body. And it's the most common to refer pain. You can refer pain into the ears, into the jaw. Again, tinnitus, that ringing in the ear can be from the masseter. So what do you do with this information? Now I've told you about all these things that could be wrong based on who knows where. Well, it's important to be able to look at these charts and say, okay, well, I'm having a pain here. You know, what could cause that? So like here on the arm, you know, it could be the deltoid, which is the muscle right here anyway. So that would be logical. But it might be subscapularis. It might be teres major. Might be infraspinatus. So these charts are handy, and if you really wanted to dig in and geek out, there's a trigger point manual. You can, yeah, and it used to be 2 volumes. They've slimmed it down to 1. Yeah, so it reads like a textbook, but those charts are in there. So even for people that don't want to read all the words, you can look at the pictures and figure out. You can find these online. Just Google trigger charts. And then self-treatment. So we're going to go through a couple of things today to help work out those tight bands. I find this book, The Role Model, has a lot of good self-treatment in it. This Jill Miller, I have nothing to do, with this, but it's just I use her book and I think it's good. And one thing I wanted to point out when you're treating yourself with a foam roller or lacrosse ball, a lot of times people, they think they're supposed to be rolling, like really going up and down. But that can be more of an irritant to the tissues than actually releasing trigger points. So it's better if when you find that tight spot that really hurts, just stay on the spot that really hurts. Try to relax, breathe, take nice deep breaths, and think about literally breathing into whatever that spot is that you found, and wait for it to release. Wait for that pain to subside. Even prop your body up on pillows and stuff to let your whole body relax better. And that will help release those. So there's a couple of exercises I'm going to take people through when we do our breakout sessions. Things I've gotten from that role model book. And then the other coaches are going to take you through some other things. So I think any questions about what I've said so far before we do the breakouts?
Any questions for